Was Jesus just a myth, or did he really walk this earth? Let's look at the historical facts. Many people believe that Jesus exists only in the Bible. But did you know that Roman and Jewish historians also wrote about him? Let's look at the most important sources. The first source is Flavius Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian. In his work, Jewish History, he writes about a man named Jesus, called Christ, who was executed under Pontius Pilate. In the passage Testimonium Flavianum, he wrote, "At this time there was a wise man, Jesus, if it is right to call him a man. He was a teacher who performed miracles. He was condemned to be crucified by Pilate, but his followers continued to believe that he was the chosen Messiah." The next source is Tacitus, a Roman historian from the year 116. He was not a Christian and had no reason to defend Jesus. Yet he mentions that a man called Christ was executed under Pontius Pilate. He wrote, "Christ, from whom the Christian name comes, suffered the ultimate punishment during the reign of Pontius Pilate." Two other Roman historians, Pliny the Younger and Suetonius, also wrote about Christians in the early 100s. They mention that Christians worshipped Christ as a god, and that the emperor tried to stop the movement. Pliny the Younger wrote that Christians sang to Christ as to a god. Suetonius wrote that Christians were punished by Emperor Nero because they followed a man called Chrestus. So why would more Roman and Jewish historians mention Jesus if he never existed? Even critics of Christianity acknowledge that he was a real person. But what about the Gospels? Are they credible historical sources? Let's take a closer look. Many people think that the Gospels are only religious texts and therefore cannot be trusted. But the fact is that they are also historical biographies, written shortly after Jesus' life. So how credible are they? The Gospels are actually closer in time to Jesus than many other ancient biographies are to their main characters. In historical research, there is a rule. The more independent sources we have about a person, the more likely it is that they existed. The Gospels were written by different authors who did not copy each other verbatim. In addition, we have Paul's letter, which is even older. The credibility is indeed strengthened by several independent sources. Paul wrote his letters already 20 years after Jesus' death, and he confirmed that Jesus was a real person. Although he did not know Jesus personally, he met Jesus' disciples, such as Peter and James. Would Paul have staked his life on a person who never existed? Although the Gospels contain miracles, it does not mean that Jesus never existed. Historians see them as valuable biographical sources, just like other ancient writings. Many people see the Gospels as religious texts, but do they also hold historical value? In this section, we'll examine common criticisms and see if the Gospels stand up as history. Some argue that the Gospels were written too long after Jesus' life to be reliable. But when we compare them to other ancient biographies, we see that they were written remarkably close to the events they describe. For example, the most famous biography of Alexander the Great was written over 300 years after his death, yet historians still consider it reliable. Skeptics argue that since the Gospels have variations, they must be unreliable. But historians understand that when multiple people report an event, small differences are expected. What matters is that the core facts remain the same. In fact, if the Gospels were identical, that would actually suggest collusion or fabrication. Some claim that the Gospels have been copied and changed so many times that we can't trust the original message. But in reality, the New Testament has more surviving manuscripts than any other ancient text, over 5,800 Greek copies. And when we compare them, scholars find that over 99% of variations are minor spelling errors or word order, not changes to doctrine. If the Gospels were fabricated, they wouldn't include details that would hurt their credibility, like Peter denying Jesus or women being the first witnesses of the resurrection. In ancient Jewish culture, women's testimony wasn't highly valued, yet the Gospels report them as the first witnesses. If this were a made-up story, why include that? When we examine the Gospels as historical documents, we find that they stand stronger than most ancient texts. Their timeline is close to the events, their minor variations show authenticity rather than fabrication, and even non-Christian historians confirm key facts about Jesus. So are the Gospels just religion, or do they also hold historical weight? That's a question worth considering. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives into history, religion, and philosophy.